Hello everyone. What's up? Welcome to the GMB channel. Hope you will enjoy our video. Before we begin, hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Here is the news title. WASPI campaigners threaten government with legal action over compensation. Government ruled out giving 10 billion to women born in 1950s whose pensionable age was raised to be equal with men. Campaigners have threatened the government with legal action unless it reconsiders its decision to rule out spending 10 billion compensating WASPI, women against state pension inequality, women hit by the change in the state pension age. Last March, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman recommended compensation should be paid to women born in the 1950s, whose pensionable age was gradually raised to be equal with men, arguing the changes had not been properly communicated to them. In December, the government announced there would be no compensation for this group. While Keir Starmer acknowledged concerns raised by parliamentarians over the government's decision, he said at the time, 90% of those impacted did know about the change, and in those circumstances, the taxpayer simply can't afford the burden of tens of billions of pounds of compensation. The WASPI campaign has sent a letter before action to the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, warning of high court proceedings if the issue is not resolved. Angela Madden, the chair of the group, said members would not allow the DWP's gaslighting of WASPI women to go unchallenged. She wrote, "The government has accepted that 1950s-born women are victims of maladministration, but it now says none of us suffered any injustice. We believe this is not only an outrage but legally wrong. We have been successful before and we are confident we will be again. But what would be better for everyone is if the Secretary of State now saw sense and came to the table to sort out a compensation package. The alternative is continued defense of the indefensible, but this time in front of a judge." The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall, were among senior ministers who backed the WASPI campaign when Labour was in opposition. Approximately 3.6 million women in the UK were affected by the phased changes to bring their retirement age into line with men, first announced in 1995. In 2011, the coalition government sped up the equalization process. Campaigners have claimed women suffered financial hardship and have had to rethink their retirement plans. Brian Leishman was one of 10 Labour MPs to support a bill introduced by the SNP urging the government to publish measures to address the findings of the Ombudsman report. Leishman said the next UK government could be a hardline far-right effort if Labour did not deliver improved living standards. A government spokesperson said, "We accept the Ombudsman's finding of maladministration and have apologized for there being a 28-month delay in writing to 1950s-born women. However, evidence showed only 1 in 4 people remember reading and receiving letters that they weren't expecting, and that by 2006, 90% of 1950s-born women knew that the state pension age was changing. Earlier letters wouldn't have affected this. For these and other reasons, the government cannot justify paying for a 10.5 billion compensation scheme at the expense of the taxpayer. WASPI decision will lead to voters deserting Labour. I'm furious at the government's decision to ignore the advice of the Ombudsman and refusal to compensate WASPI women. Anger greets UK government decision not to compensate WASPI women, 17 December. What's the point in having a lengthy and expensive review if you don't pay it any heed? I, along with many others, have been waiting a long time to hear what our compensation would be, even though it would go nowhere near the $50,000 many of us lost. I didn't imagine they would so easily dismiss our suffering as a result of government failure to give us time to plan. Labour has already removed the winter fuel allowance. One wonders what it will hit us with next. When you're close to the edge of a precipice, every kick brings greater jeopardy. It's almost as if they want pensioners to suffer, that we are their scapegoats. This is a last straw for me when it comes to Labour. I will never trust it with my vote again. I'd leave the country and go and live close to my daughter in New Zealand, but I can't because the government then freezes your pension and you're effectively worse off every year. I wrote to the pension minister about that, but it seems I'm not even important enough to warrant a reply. Maybe the government thinks we don't matter because we're not powerful, or that we'll be gone before too long. It underestimates us." Kathy Preston Heathfield, East Sussex surprise on discovering your retirement pension age is certainly not limited to WASPI women. Just a few weeks ago, my hairdresser announced that he was going to be 60 soon and would be getting his bus pass. I work at Citizens Advice, so explained he won't get a bus pass, in England, until he is pension age at 67. He was astonished he would have to wait that long, and a whole salon full of people suddenly tuned in to the conversation. None of them, from people in their 30s to 60s, knew when they would get their pension, and after I guided them to the gov.uk calculator, they were all anxiously on their phones finding out the bad news. Sheila Hutchins Truro, I do appreciate that. Financial problems have been inherited by the current government, and that it doesn't feel that it can ask the taxpayer to bear the burden, but I am a taxpayer. Does Labor not realize that I paid tax for 6 more years than I had expected to? For those 6 years, the government didn't have to pay me the winter fuel allowance. I retired from work at 66 in August this year, and now I feel like retiring from voting for a Labor government. Karen Scott Thompson Bromsgrove, Worcestershire. For women like me, born in March 1953, who finally received our state pension 3 years late with no warning, we now receive $169.50 a week, not $221.20 as stated in your article. Val Woodward, Plymouth. Of course, there should be no compensation for the WASPI pensioners, as the raising of the pension retirement age has been in the public domain for many years. The logic of their argument is that anyone affected by a change in Social Security or tax should receive an individual notification of how the change will affect them. John Martin Barry Ormskirk, Lancashire readers respond to the recent announcement that the government won't pay compensation to women affected by the rising will lead to voters deserting Labour. The recent decision by the UK government to ignore the advice of the Ombudsman and refuse compensation to the Women Against State Pension Inequality, WASPI, has sparked widespread outrage. This move, seen as a betrayal by many affected women, is not just a financial blow, but a deep wound to their trust in the government. The implications of this decision stretch beyond mere compensation. It highlights a broader disregard for justice and fairness in policymaking. As anger mounts, there is a growing likelihood that disillusioned voters will turn away from Labour, seeking alternatives that acknowledge their grievances and provide tangible support. The broken promise of justice. The WASPI campaign represents millions of women who were affected by the rapid rise in the state pension age without adequate notice. Many of these women, born in the 1950s, had planned their retirement based on the original pension schedule, only to find themselves having to work longer without sufficient time to adjust their financial plans. The Parliamentary and Health Service. Ombudsman, PHSO, concluded that these women had suffered maladministration and recommended compensation. Yet, the government's outright dismissal of this advice has left many feeling betrayed and abandoned. One of the core frustrations is the contradiction in government actions. If an independent review is commissioned to assess a wrong, then surely its findings should be honored. The decision to conduct such a review at taxpayers' expense and then ignore its recommendations only serves to deepen public cynicism towards the political system. It begs the question, what is the purpose of such inquiries if the government refuses to act upon their conclusions? A financial blow that cannot be ignored. The financial implications for WASPI women are staggering. Many lost up to $50,000 in expected pension payments due to the changes. Unlike those who had ample time to restructure their retirement plans, these women were caught off guard, leading to financial distress, forced job extensions, and in some cases, poverty. Labour's decision to remove the winter fuel allowance only exacerbates the hardships faced by pensioners, leaving them wondering what further cuts may come next. For Kathy Preston from Heathfield, East Sussex, the lack of compensation is the final straw. She voices her disillusionment, stating she can no longer trust Labour with her vote. Her frustration is echoed by many others who feel that their plight is being dismissed because they lack political power. The notion that pensioners are seen as expendable is a stark and troubling reality for those who have worked and contributed to society for decades. The political fallout the Labour Party, which traditionally relied on a strong base of older voters, may now face significant electoral consequences. Many WASPI women have historically supported Labour, believing in its commitment to social justice and fairness. However, the failure to address their concerns may push them towards other parties or even voter apathy. Disillusionment among the electorate is not limited to WASPI women. As Sheila Hutchins from Truro points out, many younger generations are equally unaware of their pension entitlements and are shocked to discover they will have to wait until 67 for retirement benefits. This revelation fuels the growing distrust in government policies, particularly among working-class and middle-class voters who feel increasingly alienated from the political elite. A widening trust deficit, Karen Scott Thompson from Bromsgrove, underscores another critical issue: the extended taxation period for affected women. Having worked 6 more years than planned, she contributed additional taxes while being denied the expected state support. This contradiction highlights a systemic issue where working citizens are expected to bear an increasing financial burden without corresponding benefits. The argument against compensation, as presented by John Martin Barry from Ormskirk, Lancashire, suggests that all citizens should be personally notified of any changes to their entitlements. While this might seem impractical, it underscores the importance of transparency and accountability in governance. If such a major policy shift was deemed necessary, why was there not a more robust effort to communicate it effectively to those affected? The international perspective. The ramifications of the pension policy extend beyond the UK's borders. Many pensioners, like Kathy Preston, express a desire to relocate abroad, but find themselves financially penalized due to frozen pensions. This policy disproportionately affects retirees who seek to live with their families overseas, making them financially worse off each year. The refusal of the pension minister to even acknowledge inquiries about this issue only reinforces the perception that the government is indifferent to their struggles. State pension inequality, WASPI campaign, has escalated its efforts to secure compensation for women born in the 1950s who were adversely affected by the changes in the state pension age. After the government ruled out a compensation package of 10 billion, campaigners have threatened legal action against the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, highlighting what they claim is an unjust and legally flawed decision. The background of the WASPI campaign. The WASPI campaign emerged in response to the government's decision to equalize the state pension age between men and women. Historically, women in the UK were eligible for the state pension at 60, while men had to wait until 65. In 1995, the government passed legislation to gradually raise the female retirement age to match that of men, with further acceleration introduced in 2011. While the intention was to create parity, many women born in the 1950s argued that they were not properly informed about these changes, leaving them financially unprepared for delayed retirement. Ombudsman findings and government response. In March of the previous year, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, PHSO, found that the government had failed to adequately communicate these changes to the affected women, amounting to maladministration. The report recommended a compensation package be devised for those impacted, acknowledging the financial and emotional hardships caused. However, in December, the government announced its refusal to provide any compensation, citing that by 2006, 90% of the affected women were aware of the changes and that taxpayers could not shoulder a 10 billion burden. WASPI's legal action. Angela Madden, chair of the WASPI campaign, has stated that the group is unwilling to let the government gaslight the affected women. In response to the refusal to compensate, WASPI has sent a letter before action to the DWP, indicating their intent to take the matter to the High Court unless a resolution is reached. Madden argues that the government's position contradicts its acceptance of maladministration findings, making the refusal to acknowledge injustice both legally and morally indefensible. Political reactions and Labour's stance. While Labour leader Keir Starmer acknowledged the concerns surrounding the WASPI issue, he defended the government's decision, stating that most women had been made aware of the pension age changes, and that the financial burden of compensation would be untenable. However, senior Labour figures, including Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall, had previously supported the WASPI campaign while in opposition. Campaigners are now pressing the Labour-led government to honor its past commitments and address the issue. Broader implications and public sentiment. The WASPI issue has generated significant public and parliamentary debate. Campaigners argue that many women were forced into financial hardship due to the lack of adequate notice about the pension changes, leading them to rethink their retirement plans. Some faced job insecurity, struggled with debts, or had to rely on inadequate welfare support. The dispute has further fueled concerns about government accountability and trust in pension policies. Meanwhile, opposition politicians, including SNP members have called for the government to implement the Ombudsman's recommendations. Brian Leishman, one of 10 Labour MPs backing an SNP-led bill, warned that failure to act on the issue could lead to a hardline far-right effort in the next UK government if Labour does not improve living standards. Government's justification. For refusing compensation, a government spokesperson defended the decision to reject compensation, stating that earlier communication of the changes would not have significantly impacted the awareness levels among 1950s-born women. The government maintains that allocating 10.5 BN in compensation would be an unjustifiable expense for taxpayers. Furthermore, officials argue that despite the findings of maladministration, there is no legal requirement to provide financial redress. So what do you guys think about this update? Let me know in the comment below. If you like my video, please press like button and subscribe for more. Hope I'll see you in next video.